right, so for week 4 Learn Together, what I'm going to do here is continue our progression of looking at what you need to do for Develop It 1. And I thought about, when I talked about this before, maybe taking some code concepts, but I think for this first one, it would really benefit us to actually take the next logical step from what you did in week 3 into week 4 and continue this concept of, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to finalize, and if you look at this work, I want you to review. This is what I'm doing now. I'm reviewing the requirements, but I want you to finalize your Develop It 1 application descriptions and write out in your own words how the program will work, right? Do this in your public repo Develop It 1 and submit your link and discuss any additional help you might need or anything else related to this work, right? And this does require replies, so I'll make sure I do that. So the reason this is helpful is it really makes you think about what your app's going to do and what it's going to need before you actually sit down and write it. And that's a really good process to go through. And we could be using things like pseudocode and other ways, but for this one, just write this out, right? What's the calculations you're going to need? So I went ahead, so that's what you're going to need for this one, and I'll show you my app that I wrote some new code this time. And so let's look real quickly just before I show you my code at the draft of the requirements. So you have to create, and I've said this before, 2 command line JS programs based on these requirements. And this is important, is to use the code style and program functionality you've learned in section 3 or 4. 3 and 4, not or, and. So functions, operators, variables, right? So if we look over here, right, template strings. And I didn't write all the things that we've learned, but I want to see you implement a majority of this, right? As I was looking through mine, I think the only thing, and I'm going to do this on my second one, is using an and or operator. Okay, but I believe, and maybe null was the other one. But, I want to see the majority of program function that you have learned now be implemented in this first Develop It. Okay, so like I've said before, and this is nothing new, right? Consider a calculation that you deal with daily or often, and use that for your first program. And then consider a more involved program that you might want to use, right? That I actually would say, that's why I want you to think about this, because the more work you put into this more involved program, the more functionality we build through it when you get to the final project, which is just, not necessarily a bigger project, but it's just another Develop It, which I'll talk about in a second, how much these weigh in your grade. You have got a lot of this base done, or at least thought about, right? So in this case, you'll create for the actual code itself, right? So now we're talking about, the code where you're actually writing the code. You'll create a new folder in your course private repo called dev, and in that create another folder called dev1, and inside that create your 2 JS files and name them what they are, right? What they represent. You'll see how I did it in a minute. And make sure you understand the time frame and requirements for getting the code review. So I did a little code review section here. So schedule a day and time with me at least 24 hours in advance. And tell me if it'll be virtual or face-to-face. And if it's virtual, what program we'll use. I prefer Google Hangouts. And then, oh yeah, so this is a good thing, is start by reviewing my office hours. That, of course, works best for me because I'm already there. Right, and see if you can come in some of these times, and if not, right, then you need I guess here's what I would say: if you're not able to make these hours, then that's definitely why I'd want maybe more than 24 hours, so I can make sure that that works for me. Right, and again, I've talked about when we look at the calendar, and maybe what I could do here is just, again, talking about when this is due for 93. Something didn't work out. Okay, so we're actually in September here, right? So, maybe that's because they're not published yet. Maybe. I suspect that's why. So we could look at that this date that they're going to be due is September 10th, right? So even though it's not showing here, this is the date it's due. And then it'd be great, I think, like I've said before, for you to come see me either somewhere starting in that week before, but the last day to see me if you want a code review for you to then modify would be before I head out of the office sometime on the 10th. And I generally leave because my classes finish and my office hour is from 12 to 1, depending on my day, and if I have an afternoon meeting, which I don't know if I will that day. I'll have to check that out so I have it on my calendar, right? I generally try to leave probably fairly early. But on Friday, I am in the lab on the 7th. I'll be in the lab from 11:05, from 10 till around noon on that day. So that's a great day to come talk to me. But again, this is really, so remember, if after midnight of the 10th, right, then you have to submit the code at by that due date by the time I look at it this morning. But that code has to freeze and you have a week, right? So you have until the following here to come talk to me and review that code. But not buts, you have a week. Now after that, I do submit late work. I do accept late work, but it's better for you to get this done on the due date, and that's because these are worth 50% of your grade, right? So these have a big impact on your grade, and you can see down here that each one is a 10%, right? So all 5 of them are 50%, but each one of them are 10%. So this is half your grade goes into these develop it, and I consider these a core part of this class. Okay, so now, so this is actually your week 4 learn together, and somebody else was asking me about, should these be beginner? And absolutely, right? That's why I emphasize only use the code programming functionality that you've learned, and you will choose something based on your level. And that's okay, as long as you meet the requirements. It doesn't matter how complex or simple it is. You want something, though, that is meaningful, right? If you add 2 numbers together, that's not meaningful. You need to say something just a little bit more involved, and again, meaningful to your daily life for the first one. And the second one, it might be a little more challenging to think through, and I talked about that last time. But having said that, probably a good transition into me looking at. So here's where I created my under my dev, I created dev 1, right? So I created a folder. If you don't, I suspect you do, but right. So the best thing here is wherever you're at, if you're in the root and you create folder, then that creates it in the root of whatever that file folder you have open. And then within that, I created another folder called dev1. And then here I have the 2 files. So I ended up bringing this one over from what I did this summer, but I ended up writing a new one called energy. Is that the one I have? Yeah. I had this one done a little better just for the write up here. Not sure what happened. I have to look at that. Maybe it's the way the comments go. So here's what I've done is and this is a real thing for me, right? So this is not, so I sleep better if the temperature inside the house is 73 degrees. So I'm going to write a program that will determine the amount of energy and therefore the cost I have to pay to achieve this temperature. My app will take in outside temperature, and if it is weekday or weekend, because I have kind of a complex energy structure payment plan with PG&E because of my solar. So I have a little bit more I have to figure out. And actually, most people, I'll tell you, here's the truth of PG&E. A little rant here. Most people do not understand how their energy is calculated. PG&E does not make it easy. I've spent a bit of time with PG&E on the phone talking about this, specifically last summer when I was doing energy audits in my house. But at least I have enough of the concept to get it. Right, so I have 2 functions. Right, I would want to see at least 2 functions and more maybe in your second one. But in this one, I'm going to set up a function called get kilowatt hours. I'm going to pass it the outside temperature, right? current outside. Oh yeah, current outside temperature is like, let's say currently outside it's, and actually more logically right now it'd be like 100, and inside of my house would be something like 80. This is more true, right? And then I pass it a per kilowatt. Okay, so kilowatt hour is not necessarily, anyway, I'm not going to go into depth on that, but so I pass it the current outside temperature, right? Current inside temperature, what's inside the house, and that kilowatt cost, and that gives me that factor, and so that gives me my kilowatt hour. So then here, when I take these in, I determine a temperature difference by subtracting the outside from the inside. If there's and this is based on if it's more than 10 degrees difference, I know it's going to take longer. So then I take that it's passing in this variable, this per kilowatt hour, multiplying it by 1.8, and then multiplying it by this. And this is where I could have gotten more involved, but I decided to just leave it here. 8 hours, right? So it's going to take about 8 hours. It's going to because it's taking longer, it's increasing my per kilowatt. And so I was just playing around here just to see what that would look like. And then if it's less than, right? So in this case, it's because I know if it's not greater than, it's less than, I calculate that. It's just one plus plus, right? So it's just incrementing that by that number, and then returning the temperature difference times that. I actually need to check this number. I will. And actually, that's the other thing, is you want to test your code, and Andrew talks about that. And I did test more of this, but I actually need to go back and probably test that, because now that I'm looking at it, that actually probably is not right, because if I take if I increment it, so if I pass it in, oh no, that's right, so it would add 0.8, that's right, because that would be 6 hours. Okay, I'm going to double check though to make sure that operated or calculated out. So then if I pass those in, I get a kilowatt hour, and then I let total energy by calling my second function get energy cost with that kilowatt hour and the day. So in this case, it is weekday or weekend. So I pay a premium, believe it or not, for weekday. I actually pay a little bit of a premium weekday versus weekend. So then, and I could have done this in one function, but I think for readability, usability, and maintenance of code, it's better in this case to pull out those things into different functions. That way they're more clearly scoped, and it's easier to read, and it's easier to maintain. So in this case, total energy then, so this number comes back, I pass this into my next function. I also pass it whether it's a weekday or a weekend, and then I put out some content here. Okay, so I actually could have, and this would have been fun, is actually just to console log total energy and use a template strings here. But then I did console log based on current temperature and day your energy cost will be, and then I put a $sign and the template strings, and I did a new line. So for this so just let me go ahead and run it. I've already been running it, so let me go ahead and just clear, right, just so you can see this. Right, so based on 182, right, it's going to cost me 26 bucks. Right, because it's a weekday, so I'm paying a premium. It's more than 10 degrees, so I'm gonna actually cost a little more. So I think what I'd like to do here is, based on this output, is also somehow grab those variables, right? So there's other ways I can output these numbers, kilowatt. So all I'm doing is doing the total energy cost, but I think I'd like to, now that I see it, also show those really key pieces like kilowatt hour, how many I did. So anyway, I'll play with that, but I think you get enough of the idea to see what I'm talking about on this first one. And on the second one, you know, this one I just kind of briefly talked about before, was the idea of, and I could actually show you, and maybe I'll do this before we actually get to this one, so I can show you ultimately what this program ended up being, and what I chose in this one to do, because this one is based on the idea of a user going to a website telling it how many cards they want to see, and then matching that by the cards flipping over. So in this case, first, and I talked about it last time, there's nothing different about this code yet. But like I said, I think what I'm going to do before this is due, before this item is due, is actually go through and show you the program that it ended up being, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. And for this case, this is not necessarily something I would use, but it got me thinking about it enough, because what I did was I ran, right, I got a random kitty, right? And then I got the kitty, because I said between 1 and 6, so I have six different cats. In a match it would be 12, because they'd have one of each to match them up. But in this case, all I was asking for was get that random number and then look up that, so get that kitty, get the second one, right? So in this case, because I don't have a user interface, I'm just, and I can't even say simulating, but I'm acting like a user that would click on a match game. You know what I'm talking about, where you flip a card over, you look at it, and then it flicks back, and then you click on another one, and then you have to match those up, see if you can remember where that was. So in this case, it's not a good representation, but it at least is a part of the app that I know I'm going to need to think about, therefore I'm going to code up, right? So then I get those two cats that I've randomly selected, and then I compare them, right? So again, the first one, and this is an important part I didn't talk about last time, is I got inspiration from the math random on Mozilla for running this, for figuring out random, right? So there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you say this is where I got inspiration from. I did name it my own method, right? My own function here, not method. We could talk about that. But anyway, I used their logic for doing that, which is fine, because the rest of this code is my own. Okay, so again, those are just ideas I want you to look at. I will probably do one more video for here, but I think after setting and thinking about this today, that this one, this to learn together, I want you to take this to the next logical step by considering this, writing out, you know, how you're going to calculate for your first app and your second one. You know, that way the more time you spend with this, the easier this is going to be. Okay, that's why I'm doing this, because for this first one, you know, it's all unknown and you're not sure where these go. And by the time we get to the third one, I think we'll both be in a better position, because honestly, I'm redoing the course content for this completely. So I've rethought it based on what I've done. Like I said before, the reason I'm having you come in is based on my experience of the importance of students being able to walk through with someone their code and have somebody do a code review. And I don't mean debug, because I said clearly, and I don't know why that brought to attention, but when you come to see me, the idea is, right, it must work. So if you bring me code that doesn't work, no, that's going to affect your work. If you bring me code that I suspect you didn't write, you and I'd have a conversation with that. So don't do that. Really, this is you learning to take a problem, create code that solves that problem or gives you that output you're looking for. Not a problem to go look at some code that does this, but you really want to be able to write this code yourself. Okay? That's really the thing. Okay. So last thing I think I said here was, you know, I told you about the code review. We'll test it and we'll discuss the code you wrote. You'll submit your code URL, so this folder right here, right? So you'll submit this dev1 folder, and then at the same time schedule an appointment with me, right? So again, this may change a little bit based on when you do that, if you're doing it, but I do want a 24-hour heads up of you're going to come in and see me, and I really would prefer to have that code at the same time so I can have a chance to look at it. So if you're giving me like very little notice, that's not going to be as helpful to you and to me if you give me a little more heads up. And there's about 20 of you in here, so it should be very doable to get this done, like I said, I've given you hopefully a time frame to understand the best time to do this, but the sooner you do it, right, the sooner you do it, the better as well, because I mean that's the other thing about you know, having this week. You'll have this item due here, the third that I'm talking about, with the learn together, and then you'll have a week for you to complete this. So hopefully you'll take advantage of that time and not wait. But anyway, enough from me. Have a great one. See you later.